Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Fire Emblem podcast, Season 5, Episode 2. I am Blazer, and with me I have my usual co-host, Shu.
Hi, I'm here.
It's a rare sighting. I gotta, pay him money to show up here, so
Yep,
thank him while you can.
I got a sweet 75 cents for this podcast. If you guys need me after this, I'll be in the Caymans.
All right. So what's our topic for today?
Our topic is a list that was made by various members of the Fire Emblem community, particularly members from Blazer's site, your site, Blazer, FireEmblemShrine.net.
Yeah, I remember you used to go there back in the day.
Yeah, I used to go there. No, longtime haven for the hardcorest of hardcore Fire Emblem fans.
You can say that again.
But
yeah,
you guys made a list of. Well, it started off as something that correct me if I'm wrong, a list of things that were missing from Fire Emblem Awakening, the game before Fates, for you guys keeping track at home. But kind of evolved into more of an analyzation of the more recent Fire Emblem releases as it relates to the rest of the series as a whole, the previous games.
True.
Does that sound right?
Yeah. I mean, not even just Fates and Awakening, the most recent two, but even like Shadow Dragon and FE12, and just kind of like it's not like an objective list at all of like, oh, like these are things the series did wrong, whatever. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, like these are things that that changed, like for better or worse.
Right.
Maybe you didn't realize it, or maybe there are things in the older games that like we took for granted, and then they kind of changed to like, yeah, like like I kind of missed that, like I didn't realize it until it was gone, that kind of thing. So I mean, basically, we're just gonna like casually go over the list. I mean, some of these are a lot deeper than others. Some of them aren't very deep. Like our first item is feet, and I mean, they fixed that in Fates, so I mean, we're good now.
If you like
feet, we got feet now.
Yeah, if you like feet, Fire Emblem Awakening, not the game for you.
And definitely not.
I would skip that one if you like feet. But the second item on the list is chapter goal variety, Blake.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is pretty fair because I know that one of the big things that people seem to agree on with Awakening was that it really missed like chapter goal variety. Like I've even heard like people who like that game, they're like, yeah, like I kind of wish though like it would have like had more different things, because it's usually just like defeat all the enemies or like defeat the boss or whatever. They kind of skimped out on like the defend this map for X many turns and seize the throne and kind of the more dynamic. I mean, you could probably explain this better, of like having a goal that's not necessarily just based on combat. I mean, it is a strategy game, so the goal isn't always just to like mow down all our enemies in other RPGs, at least not necessarily, right?
Right. No. I totally agree. And yeah, in Fire Emblem 5, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the podcast before, there are quite a few escape chapters, and those being the chapters, if you played the previous games in the series, are
maybe a few too many.
Yeah, are chapters where you don't necessarily have to beat anybody at all. You just have to get your lord, or in the case of Fire Emblem 5, everybody to an escape square, an escape tile on the map. And the curious thing about some of the chapters in Fire Emblem 5, Thrakia 776, a lot of those chapters, there were a lot of opponents on the map, or enemy units on the map, that you could not realistically beat with characters that have leveled up normally up until that point of the game. And that always added an interesting dynamic. Like you said, Blazer, there was a little bit more story to it. It was not necessarily story, strategy to it. that it wasn't necessarily like all the chapters in the new games where it's your team beefed up against the other team, more beefed up than they were in the last chapter. It was in these escape chapters back in the day. It was basically like just try to get out of here alive. I remember one in particular where the enemy units would not even notice you until until you like stepped in their movement.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I don't know, but
Yeah.
it added a really interesting dynamic that I had not seen in Fire Emblem before, and I don't know. I would like to see that kind of thing come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they did spice it up a bit with Fates. I still think there's room for a little bit more. I don't remember seeing a lot of like a Seize the Throne kind of maps. Um, there's still a lot of like defeat the boss or like defeat all the enemies. But I mean they did spice up the goals a little bit. But I'd still say like you've got a huge arsenal of ideas from previous games. So I mean why not bring back some of the more interesting ones or tweak the ones that maybe they were alright but they weren't all that great. I don't know. Yeah, it was just a thought. One thing I will say, you mentioned how like this is totally unrelated, but you mentioned how like there'd be characters that are like way stronger that you couldn't realistically beat. I did kind of like that just because like I'm kind of a little kid at heart. I really like the whole power level thing, right? Where it's like, oh, like these guys are like super strong and like yeah, like I'm not gonna be able to like face off with them for like a long time. I just kind of like seeing that as opposed to games where they always just kind of level the enemies so that they're always like the perfect match for you, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So like you could be fighting like the big bad army early on, and like all the enemies are super incompetent, and you could be fighting them late game, and it's like it's the same big bad army, but all the enemies are like they're all like your strength now, right? The game's just kind of like balancing it to you. Sometimes it's kind of nice to have that like plot, like yeah, like we're not strong enough to take on these guys. But you have to be careful that like, all right, if you always make the difficulty equal to the plot, then you could have like difficulty spikes and other stuff which just aren't fun. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's a better storytelling
Right.
component when you have characters like that where you meet them and you maybe go toe to toe with them, but you're not gonna beat them.
You're right.
And you're running into that with a lot of games that have traditionally very good stories. You probably see this in Final Fantasy a lot, but they're by no means the only culprits of this. But where you have a character that you meet you can't beat, but
The unbeatable boss battle.
right,
Right.
yeah.
And that's a total story dynamic. Some people actually hate it because they're like, well, if I can't beat this boss anyway, then why not? Like, why do I get to fight him? Well, it's like, it's to prove a point, right? Like,
Yeah. And
like, this guy's older than you, he's been fighting longer than you, like, obviously he's not gonna, like, be the same level as you, right?
and it's setting up a bigger, better battle in the future.
Exactly.
That's gonna mean a lot more to you instead of like you got almost the enemy of the bad guy of the week in a lot of Fire Emblem chapters where you meet a guy in the chapter that you kill him. Like
Right.
here's a guy who's a bad dude, whatever, kill him.
Right.
And I mean, you don't remember any of those guys, so that's
Unless
why I
it's like Bad of the Beast or Glass.
Yeah. Well, okay, but those guys are unforgettable characters. How could I forget Bad of the Beast?
But yeah, I get your point. Like, I don't remember like all the lens mode.
O'Neill.
O'Neill, another classic. Ged. Some of these managed to make a name for themselves in a single chapter, which is kind of impressive.
I think they make a name for themselves because they're so boring and one
right.
like it's a joke,
That's true, right? They get their like 3 lines of dialogue, and it's like, I'm dead. Damn. Like,
yeah. Like, how could this have happened?
I should just make a book of like generic like boss quotes and death quotes, because once you've seen like 20 of them, I feel like you've seen them all. Like, I know there's a specific boss in Phase. This is just funny that literally goes like, I'm dead. I'm like, dude, you aren't dead. You're still talking. Like,
shut up,
it's
dude.
a cheesy quote. Like,
so shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's move on. What's the next one?
Next item is villages and chests with competitive thieves.
So, am I supposed to say something about that?
Well, I mean, you're the one who wrote this list, but I can start if you like.
I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So it's basically like in some of a lot of the older games, you would have villages, and it would be a race to get to the village before the bandits or the pirates or whatever it is gets to them. So you would have a kind of pressure incentive. You'd want to like send off some units to intercept the pirates, and then maybe have another unit like go to the village just to make sure. You'd have to be concerned about the AI. Like, all right, like, is the AI gonna attack me, or is the AI just gonna like straight go like destroy the village? Sometimes there will be characters inside the village, or like good items or whatever inside the village. You want to rescue those. Other times you'd also have a game that I was playing a while back, like FE6. If you like visit all the villages, or if you like save all the villagers or recruit all the whatever, you get like a bonus. So I mean, basically, you have all these different incentives for like getting to the villages, and I mean, with the chest, it's the same idea. It's just a little bit more direct. You have a chest, and you have thieves going to the chest. So it's like, all right, I could turtle, and maybe the combat would be a little bit easier because I'm playing defensively. I just bait out every single enemy one by one. But the downside is like I'm not gonna get to that thief and get to kill that thief on time, or get to like steal his lockpick so he can't steal it. I mean, some chapters you even use thieves like tactically. You're like, all right, I'll let the thief open the door, and then I'll kill him like after he opened the door for me. Or like, I'll let the thief like steal that item, and then I'll kill the thief and get the item, so that like I don't have to have my thief do it because maybe your thief's in a different location. So I mean, it just adds like all this different dynamic kind of strategy, where it's like, all right, like I gotta position my thief here and like send out the cavalry to intercept this thief or this bandit or whatever it is.
It totally forces you to overextend yourself when you're traditionally playing, especially if you've got a beefed up team. That really doesn't. The enemies in the chapter don't necessarily pose much of a threat to you, and you've got your formation down. Like I mean, like you said, like you're turtling your way through a map and just baiting, picking and choose
Right.
the enemy units that you're going to kill next, and you're really not having any problems. But when you have to compete with thieves and bandits and whatnot that are going to steal things from chests and burn down villages, you have to break up your formation. You have
Right.
to.
Right.
It's a race against the clock. You got to keep moving across the map, even if you don't necessarily feel comfortable putting a certain unit in a certain position where they might get killed, and it definitely makes things more challenging.
Right.
It makes these chapters more memorable, in all honesty.
Yeah, as well, right? You feel more motivated, and it's like you're forced to come up with a different strategy besides just like playing defensively, which is always it's comfortable, but it's like, all right, this isn't gonna work. Like, okay, I'll have this unit attack, and then I'll rescue him, or I'll create a wall to like protect this one unit. You come up with different ways, and it just forces you to think in different ways. So I mean, that's it. And they have done it in some games. It's not like they haven't done it all, but they just used to do it a lot more in the older games.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I'm probably not remembering this right, but I feel like it was almost every single chapter that had a good amount of villages. There were thieves that you had to compete with.
Yeah, yeah. At least in FE6, it feels like
Oh, definitely.
50% at least of the chapters have like something you're like
Hmm.
competing against.
That's the game I was thinking of, in all honesty. Yeah,
Right.
like, that game was tough.
That's just the one I played most recently, but yeah. More saturated, vibrant colors. I don't know if you noticed this, but ever since really FE11 had a really dull palette, and the graphics as a result, like people didn't like them. They fixed that with FE12 a bit by making it brighter, but they didn't actually change the graphics. Like the animations and everything were like basically still the same. And then they went to FE13, and like that was okay. But they started adding a lot more like browns and kind of darker colors. I think it's because they're trying to like emulate I guess more of like the Western look. Like Japanese people love their like really colorful stuff. The Western looks kind of like more like dull and like quote unquote like realistic or whatever. I just found the vibrant worlds of the GBA games and I guess FE9 a little bit more interesting, but this is completely personal preference. I mean, I also liked FE5, and I think that generally had a darker palette. So I mean, it totally depends.
I think, um, I mean, I don't really have any sort of opinion on this particular topic, but I do find one thing interesting is that I feel like, and you can tell me if you've also noticed this, the East, I mean, particularly Japanese, when they have a piece of media that they want to, I don't know, give the
Okay.
impression that is very serious,
Hmm.
they want to adopt those darker colors, make everything look like, I don't know, like it's
Right,
Saving
but I
Private
mean,
Ryan or
in a
something.
way that suits the newer games even less. Like,
But yeah, no, that's what I was about to say. Like, it doesn't. It for games that are not that serious, like Fates and like Awakening, you find it kind of, I don't know, like it doesn't fit. You know, I feel
right,
like those games, if they were, it would make more sense if they were more vibrant. I
that's
mean,
true. That's true.
this isn't Attack on Titan here. You know, it's not something that's meant to be super serious. These games are kind of, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're not serious. They're not serious in a way that an
Right.
Attack on Titan is, or even the older Fire Emblem games that were more colorful were.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, it's definitely a matter of shooting it because, like, I mean, I play lots of like dark games and whatever, and like, I don't complain about those because like it adds to the atmosphere, it fits the atmosphere. But here
Right.
it's kind of like, all right, like you've got all these like cutesy character designs and like tropey characters with like different jokes and stuff, and like cool like fantasy settings, but it's like it's almost like hindered by all the like the darkness and the brown, and it just doesn't suit it as well in my opinion. But again, that's a complete opinion thing. So yeah. So
So
next we have late game characters. You remember
late
those?
game, like Athos to Barn. I
Hmm.
think the first one. I think the name of the archetype is the Gato archetype
Right. Yeah, and that's because
from
he was like the first
he was the
character of
first
that
one.
type.
Which yeah. Um so let me ask you this. Why do you think that people like these late game characters so much?
Um,
Or at least the people that made this list. Why do you think?
I don't know if it's a matter of liking it. What I would say is that these characters add a kind of depth to the game. They serve two, maybe three purposes. So their first purpose is if the player is like not very good, they need some kind of what's the word, like some character to fall back on basically.
I almost want to say like, yeah, it's a fallback character. It's sort of like, it reminds me of rubber banding and like Mario Kart, where you don't want the people that are bad to be too bad.
Right, exactly. I mean, like you're fighting like the final boss or whatever. You can't hold back for everyone because it's like, all right, then it's not going to be climactic. But at the same time, like, what are you going to do? So you give him Athos, who can like take on most of the final chapter himself, or Tybarn, who's Tabarn, however you want to say it, is just like super awesome.
Mhm.
Um, you have these super strong characters for people who maybe they didn't they're not that good at FE, or whatever, maybe their best character died, so like now they don't have anyone. You don't want them to get into a situation where they can't beat the game because they don't have anyone,
Right.
right?
Uh.
Go ahead.
Um. So yeah, I don't know. My stance is that, like, I don't mind these characters because sometimes it's done very well. Like, uh, Tabarn was set up. Tabarn didn't just show up in the middle of the
For no reason.
for no reason, you know. And
Right. And that was my
honestly,
second point, was that it's going to be like story related. It has that depth of like, here's a super strong character that's like, he's been an NPC for a while, and like now I get to play him, and it's like
yeah,
super
yeah,
cool,
like, yeah,
and
that
it's
is,
like
that is cool.
climactic.
And but it's not as cool when you have a character that come out of nowhere, like they did in Shadow Dragon, which
Right.
the Shadow Dragon just doesn't have very good writing in the first place because it's an old game. It's an old game. That's the case. But so yeah, I don't know. I think it can be done well. I don't necessarily think that it's a good or bad thing. I
Mhm.
think that if it fits the game, it should have one. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah. I just kind of miss it because I guess the last thing would be that these characters tend to be older characters, and now the newer games have such a young cast of like because like everyone has to like marry everyone, so like everyone's like marrying age or whatever, or like or isn't married for some reason, and they're also worrying about like building up the characters and all that, so they don't like to include these characters late game. If you look at like the recruitment, like a recruitment list for all the games, you'll notice that the late games for the newer games, there's very few, if any, characters. Like I think Awakening, the last characters you recruit in the main game are like Basilio and Flavia, and like 4 or 5 chapters before the end of the game. It's slightly different from like recruiting a character like the chapter before the final chapter or
Right.
during the final chapter. And I mean, like, okay, you don't get to use them much, but it just kind of adds a little bit of again, like depth and dynamic to it, to the story or whatever. So yeah, that's just a thing. Again, you're right. It's not technically a good or bad. It's just something that some people might miss. So how about the next one? Character cameos and villages, fights like before they join you, or appear as enemies. So I mean, here's a classic example you should remember is the one in FE8 where you see the general early on. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And actually, the one I always think of, like that, I think of that one, and I also think of seeing Hector before you really get to see him in action in Fire Emblem 7.
Oh yeah, yeah. You see him, if I remember correctly, in a house in Chapter 7.
Yeah, 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 in a house.
Yeah. I mean, even Elliewood, like he comes in and
Oh,
like he saves Ninian like at the end of the chapter, and I forget like what exactly they were doing at that time, but like it's cool because you like it's not his story, but he takes on the role of like an NPC there, 4 chapters or whatever before you actually get to play him, and then there's that perspective change, and it's just cool.
yeah, and I don't know, I think of when I was working on that hack that never saw the light of day, a couple years ago. We a big part of the world building and the storytelling in our minds was going to be done through these houses because you can't hit people over the head with tons of just like world
Direct like
setup.
narrative.
Like yeah, yeah, yeah. You can't just say this is what the world is like constantly. People are gonna check out after a little bit. But if people do want to take the time to look at all the villages, they should get a little bit of a something extra. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't know. In my opinion, the
That's how you
people in
do
all
it. You sprinkle the lore around, right? You don't.
right, right, right. You want to be with all sorts of little cool nuggets and maybe like a little bit of extra foreshadowing. You know what I mean? Like they give you. I mean, the people that look and read everything, they're gonna have a little bit of a better idea. I mean, they should have a better idea of what the world is like than the
Exactly.
people that don't.
And they
Not
have a
every.
greater appreciation for the game as a whole as a result.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just better crafted. That's just. I mean, that's set in stone. I don't like. I don't think that every house in a Fire Emblem game needs to have like a character like the NPCs in Pokemon that don't say anything at all. Like I like mowing my lawn or whatever, something
Right, right. I mean,
dumb
a
like
lot of them do. A lot of them are like, did you know the weapon trial exists? And it's like, yeah,
like
I did. But like,
yeah.
you know.
Oh,
But I mean, like, some of those are okay, right? Like, that's a good way of, like, sprinkling in extra information. But at the same time, like, yeah, you do want to also, world build.
the I, I think the point is you want to reward somebody for looking at all these houses that you put in the game. Because
That's
I don't know about you, but I remember going to houses and villages, and I mean, besides for the items that you sometimes get, I would go into a house and then they would say something like, "That was a waste of time. Why did I do that?
right.
I didn't. I wasted that move hoping that there was something
Worth it. No, you're totally
worth getting."
right. But when there is, it's like, it's cool. It's like, oh, yeah, like, I'm glad I did that, right?
Right, definitely, definitely.
All right. You want to do the next one?
Yeah, next one that you have here is unique battle themes as opposed to renditions of the map theme.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about music, right?
Yeah. I mean, specifically, like, so, like, the newer games, they have the map theme, and then they have the battle theme. And in most of the cases, the battle theme is just like a faster pace, like more upbeat, dramatic, whatever version of the map theme, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they actually do this. They do this cool thing where they like created the songs and time it or whatever, so that like as you go into the battle, it plays from the same part that the map theme was playing on, but it just plays like the the upbeat version or whatever, right? The battle version. And I think this is a pretty cool effect. It definitely like helps with the continuity or immersion or whatever. But at the same time, I also have a deep appreciation for having unique battle themes. Just because I really like the games like FE6, FE7, FE8 especially, and I'm gonna get crap for mentioning those games, but like they're the ones that I remember the battle themes a lot for like specific characters, or even just in general. Powerful foe, softly with grace, everything into the dark, campaign of fire, Zephiel's theme, in the name of burn. Um, there's just so many different good themes, or it's kind of like instead of like having that transition from like a map theme to like a glorified map theme, it's kind of like a transition from like a chill map theme to like epic battle, like So again, it's not an objective better or worse. It's just something that I think some people maybe missed. It's something they could go back to maybe. How do you feel about that?
I believe that. I mean, now that you're talking about it, I'm a big proponent because I believe that. I mean, it makes things. I'm all about making these things in these games memorable. And if when you do have those unique battle themes, not only like when you hear the song again, you're gonna be thinking of a specific battle, a specific chapter. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And that's and you're right. It adds to. It makes them more memorable. I mean, there's a reason why you can list off that pretty much that entire soundtrack, and not necessarily for the game with the less interesting score. You know what I mean? Like it's more memorable.
And I think even Radiant Dawn, I believe, I think it had. I forget exactly, but I believe it had different like normal battle themes depending on like which part of the game it was, as well as like different boss themes. And I mean, they still have like unique boss themes, but you generally don't hear them as much, and they're generally created to be very in tone with the map theme, as opposed to having a very different dynamic. If you listen to like some of the map themes versus the battle themes in the previous games, there's a very like clear difference in the feeling. You're like, yeah, like this is like a dedicated map theme, and then there's like, yeah, this is like an epic battle theme, and they just give you different vibes. And I guess I just kind of, I don't know. I guess you could say it helps with immersion in its own way. Getting into the battles or whatever. Because when it comes to Fire Emblem, in the end, you're always just watching the battles. You're never contributing. It's a simulation game, right? So like, if I'm gonna watch the battles, it might as well be like full on epic, right?
Yeah. So on the topic of music variety, like the same
Mostly,
instrument and
reading
sound.
what I saw, mostly the same instruments and sound to music throughout. So I believe whoever wrote this meant that um, basically some games have a very, I guess, limited tone with their music. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the music can get a little bit boring if you're always using the same kinds of instruments. You're not really experimenting with the different music. All the music starts to blur a little bit. It's kind of like hey, that song sounds like really similar to that song. Um, I mean, it's not like any game is completely free of this, and you want the game to sound like it has one cohesive soundtrack. But like I would say Radiant Dawn is guilty of this. Um, because I don't know if you remember that game, but it actually has a really good soundtrack. But everything's like super instrumental for the most part, and then there's like a few like upbeat like drum songs and guitar songs. But I only remember like the very instrumental music, and it all just kind of blurs for me. Um, I couldn't really appreciate the soundtrack until I like listened to it afterwards, and like I finally started to like piece out the melodies. Now that they like, I don't know if that makes sense, but basically the music all sounded the same to me at first. So
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've never really been
that much attention to the music.
that much attention to the music, but I do kind of understand the idea that you don't necessarily appreciate or I don't know, really get your head wrapped around a soundtrack until you've kind of picked it apart, like you said.
Uh-huh.
I know I feel that way, not just about music, but like, I don't know, movies and
Mm-hmm.
honestly a lot of video games. I don't really know how I feel about something until after I've already like experienced it and I sit and I like just kind of let it marinate for a
Right.
while and think about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Basically, all I'm saying is I like to see a little bit more, what's the word? Like, willingness to, like, try out different, like, song types. Like, it'd be awesome to hear, like, and Fates, like, they went for this very, like, everything's, like, Japanese sounding. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, throw in some other kinds of, songs that don't fit with it, and it'll sound good. It'll be more memorable that way because
Mhm.
different, because it contrasts basically. That's really all I want: contrast between the music. Because if you contrast between the music, then each individual piece of music is that much more memorable, and that's all it comes down to. All right. So now that I finally got that, um, quality map design instead of open, sometimes symmetrical, bland maps, and then also quality use of terrain and maps to make positioning better. I think these two are probably related. You want to talk about them?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's almost like a hard thing to describe with the new Fire Emblem games, but they're definitely following this trend of like they're almost trying to be influenced by multiplayer shooters in what I mean they're putting together. Like it's not always the case. I can probably pick out a couple chapters in the newer games that don't necessarily follow this trend, but it they just feel like different colored mazes. You know what I mean? Do you
Uh-huh.
get what I'm saying here? Uh, where in I don't know, maybe I'm just looking at it this way because I'm nostalgic, but I feel like some of the older Fire Emblem games, they felt like actual environments that were in that it was in. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right. I feel like with the newer games, I mentioned sometimes symmetrical and bland maps. I can actually, if you look at a ton of maps, you'll find that a lot of them are symmetrical, like like different throne rooms. Like here's a good one. I remember the throne room in Awakening, I believe, where you fight. I think it's Walhart the second time, and I believe even the map outside before that. Both of them, if I remember correctly, are symmetrical. And it's like in the older games, you would have had a kind of like a winding path. You would have had like two split paths, and then a room with a chest that's a weird size, and some stairs and some weird doors, and the throne room is kind of weird. Like I'm thinking about all the Ostia maps because like throughout FE6 and FE7, you visit Ostia like 18 times.
Hmm.
So like it's just a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't look as nice on the front, but from a play perspective, it's just more interesting to go down that winding path that isn't as linear. It makes more use of the space because you have the walls. You can't just obviously go through the walls. You end up traveling a farther distance. There's different paths to explore, like the FE8 map where you I think fight Vigard, or even the map where you fight Geb, if you remember. I believe there's like those winding hallways. And I mean, sure, they might be annoying in a way, but it does like make the maps a little bit more interesting. And now it's just very like
I,
the maps look pretty, but that's it.
I think it goes back to these maps just being it goes back to this trend that we're seeing pop up a lot in this list is that we appreciate things that are memorable. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said that some of the maps, especially in the GBA era, made more use of the space that the map took up. You know what I mean? I remember. I mean, you end up going up along the very razor edge of the map a lot more in those older games than you do in the newer ones.
Mm-hmm.
You end up going down a lot more like one tile hallways that are absolute nightmares because of archers and mages and whatnot. You ended up dealing with that a lot more, and and I mean, you had the game plan for those a lot more.
Right.
than you necessarily do have to for the
And the enemies were more spread out and sometimes more strategically placed, as opposed to now you have a lot of clumps of enemies where it's just kind of like, all right, there's like 5 enemies here, and if I like bait one of them, the rest are also going to aggro, and I just kind of have to like, it's just kind of like 2 armies clashing, in one turn. It's a very like, I don't know, straight on dynamic. I remember, slight spoilers, the final chapter for one of the Fates routes is just like, it's just a race to the boss basically, because there's nowhere really to hide. There's no paths to go down. There's not much terrain to use. It's just like, all right, I gotta kill the boss. That's the goal of the chapter. There's like 18,000 enemies in the way, and like there's nothing I can really do. Like I can't like forge a path and like protect everyone at the same time. So it's just like, all right, I just have to like make a beeline straight down the middle. People are gonna attack me. There's nothing I can do about it, right? And I just have to like kill the boss as soon as possible. And for me, like that wasn't as enjoyable as having something just a little bit more dynamic. I mean, the final chapter in Awakening was also kind of like that, at least on harder modes. You're just kind of making a beeline straight for the front because the whole map is just one big open area. You know what I'm saying? There's nowhere you can't go, but at the same time, there's nowhere the enemies can't go either.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that takes care of both of those. Strong bonuses from terrain to make it more worth using. That just means terrain is basically nerfed. I mean, if you want people to use terrain more, it has to be powerful. I think that's just a fundamental game concept, is that if you want people to care about a feature or use a feature, you have to make it worthwhile. Another good example would be like, do you use those spells in like Final Fantasy type games, like turn-based RPGs or whatever, where it's like increases your attack or like it gives like a status effect ever?
Uh-huh.
Do you use them?
I mean, yeah, I would say so. Not like in a tactical sense, but it's like convenience, like.
Yeah, it totally depends. For me, I only use them if they're like actually like powerful or strong. If it's like, all right, I use like one turn to increase my attack by like 10%. It's like, well, I might as well just attack normally, and like in the end, it like pans out to be the same. Like maybe I'll get a slight benefit, but it's really not worth the amount of like effort, right? Like it's easier to just like press A repeatedly and use that. I mean, think about like Pokemon, right? Like who early game, no one's gonna use Growl usually to like lower the enemy's attack, right? Like why would you do that when you can just like use Tackle like 5 times in a row and like win that way? You know what I'm saying? So all my point is, like, if you want people to use terrain, you got to make it good enough that it's worth using, and that goes for any game design or any game feature.
Right.
How about the next one?
Limited stats plus limited grinding to prevent reducing the strategy element by overwhelming with stats. So, and it also says here, another way to look at this might just be to state a mechanically balanced basis. So.
Yeah, I don't know who wrote this.
Yeah, neither do I. I'm
in the comments, but
what were you saying?
they said that Radiant Dawn is pure raw power creep. This is just I'm just reading their comment on it. Interesting. So I think basically the point of this is saying that when you limit the stats, especially to the 20s, and you also limit grinding, it makes it less of an RPG and more of a strategy game, because you can't just rely on kind of overpowering the enemies with like, all right, I'm stronger than you, right? That's the RPG mechanic, right? Like if you're having a tough time with a boss, you just grind so that you're a higher level and so that you can like beat him. I mean, you can do a strategy, like you can use strategies to some extent, but in the end, strategies can only account for like so many levels in most cases, right? Like if you're like level 60 and you're fighting a level 75 dude, like in most, unless it's like a very good game, at least in the older games, like it doesn't matter how good your strategy is, you're gonna lose, right? And the FE equivalent would be like if you're, a level 1 unpromoted unit and you're trying to fight a level 20 promoted unit, like I don't care how good your strategy is, you're just outmatched. You're gonna get like doubled and one rounded, right?
Right.
So like on the reverse side, like if you just let people like grind and overwhelm the enemies with stats, then it kind of changes the experience. And then as a result, everyone has their own experience because like let's say I don't like grinding, but you do, and we start talking about the game. It's like, yeah, like that chapter was super easy, and I'm like, what? Like that chapter was like super tough. Well, maybe it's because like my units like didn't do anything, or like they didn't do any extra like skirmishes, whereas like you did, and you have all this money from the DLC or whatever. There's definitely a lot more asymmetrical experiences compared to before. But I mean, you could also say that even in the older games, some people abused, Effiett's Valmy Tower, or other, arena abusing, right? It's not like no one ever arena abused, right? I'm pretty sure everyone's guilty of trying that at least once.
Yep.
So, and then, it is what it is, but it's just a thought.
That's a thought.
Character models that don't look super odd, especially outside of battle. Okay, so what are your thoughts on, because I know you played a little bit of Fates, what are your thoughts on the character models compared to, like, Radiant Dawn?
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend to love the models for Radiant Dawn, but at least they felt like they made sense in a lot of ways. Like, I didn't go into battle and say, "Oh, that's not how I pictured that character looking," and I don't necessarily mean to say that the in-battle animations don't look like the characters themselves in Awakening and the
Mm-hmm.
Fates, but there's something off-putting about. I mean,
I
the
think it's the
way they move.
proportions.
There's the proportions and the way they move that make them feel like they're like puppets or cartoon
Exactly.
characters.
I was
Like,
literally thinking just that. I literally just imagined strings on them, and it feels like their body parts are being moved kind of like puppets, and instead of, it's kind of like, all right, he's swinging his sword. I just kind of imagine a string on his arm as he's like swinging his arm, and I don't know, the way they run.
yeah, it's
Okay,
like
so
like
everyone, I
football.
have some homework for you, all right? Go play Awakening Your Fates and look at the animations, and you'll see that like a lot of the characters, they have like a very like bent stance. They'll bend their body around the knees, and like as they run, it just looks. If you compare it to other games, it looks very odd.
And
Um,
I mean, not even just comparing to Fire Emblem games, comparing to
no,
games that just
exactly.
have,
No, I just mean like
yeah,
compared to other games straight.
right. Just
Um,
anything, yeah.
Japanese or Western. I mean, and the animation styles are very different, but like,
It,
it's definitely weird.
at least it doesn't feel weird like Awakening and Fates do. Like they don't.
Right.
Like I said, I mean, like we both said, they look like puppets.
I mean, despite that, they're still like enjoyable, but it's just a little odd, especially in cutscenes. It's a little bit more jarring. In the battles, I don't really care because like they're walking around fighting, but like I remember in Awakening, I would like see like a cutscene with a soldier, and he would like run up really awkwardly and then like wait, and then he'd like turn around really awkwardly and like run away, and I just like it was always just so weird for me. For whatever reason, I couldn't handle it. I mean, the fact they didn't have feet obviously didn't help, but we already mentioned that.
Right.
All right, non-generic support conversations between parents and children. Do I even need to say anything about this? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. It's just I think that anybody that's played Fates and Awakening know that dialogue is not their game's strong suit. It I think what this particular point on the list means to say is that you want you don't want these characters to be flat in general. And we've talked about flat characters in Fire Emblem in previous episodes of this podcast, but it pops up again in this particular list, in that you want. I mean, you want these are characters, like these are theoretically, in theory, allegedly, these characters, the parents and the children are real people or are supposed to represent real people and real
Within the
personalities.
context of the universe, yeah.
Right, within the context of the universe, but they do not feel that way when you have these conversations. You feel like you're reading something that somebody decided that parents talk to their children's like. Like I don't know.
Right.
It doesn't feel correct. It doesn't feel like something that you would run into in the real world.
It's almost like a placeholder, like a puzzle piece, or
Like a stock conversation.
right. Yeah. Um, hidden unexpected relationships between characters. There's so many of these in some games. I would say anything from probably even FE5. I'm not as familiar with FE the Jug Drill saga as you, but probably anywhere from FE4 to FE10, you can find some very interesting relationships or alleged relationships between characters.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to list some off, some of your favorites?
Well, I think of pretty much anything with. I'm gonna bring up Fire Emblem 4 in particular because they have a very similar system as far as relationships go on paper to the last two games in the series. Because Fire Emblem 4 also, if you played that game, you know, has a marriage system that results in children, and so there are a lot of relationships. But the way that these relationships, I don't know, developed were infinitely more interesting and unexpected in the way that, like, we live in the 21st century, so we have the internet that tells us what two characters are the best together. But back in the day, when you were just kind of discovering these things, you would never have thought that Beowulf and Lachesis would be good together. Considering, if you have not played Fire Emblem 4, Lachesis is a princess of one of the big time factions in the game, and Beowulf is just some kind of scumbag mercenary Han Solo type.
I mean, his name is Beowulf. I mean, that's all you need to know right there.
Yeah. And it was super cool. I mean, they're very good as far as, like, they give the children the best stats, and
it's like Beauty and the Beast, or
yeah. They hit it off really well. And if you organically discovered that back when that game came out, like, that would be, I mean, that's crazy. That's super cool. And it's not just those two. Lachesis herself has another interesting relationship with Finn, who is in Fire Emblem 4 and in Fire Emblem 5, but he's a knight for Leinster. And he is also they also have an interesting dynamic too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like has done this for such a long time. What I always liked is that before the characters get very limited dialogue, you honestly didn't know a lot about them. They would always seem like kind of shallow. It's just like, all right, like, you know, I got like, you know, the second Pegasus sister. I got another mage. I got another, you know, generic axe user. You know, like whatever it is. But then like you find out a little bit about them. You find out that like these two characters that joined maybe during completely different times or whatever are somehow related. You'd have characters that you know, that maybe met off screen, or like two minor characters would somehow tie together. There's so many good examples. You had you know, Wade and Lot in FE6, Deke's two mercenaries, and how they had in a certain chapter, you go to Western Isles, you meet Wade's sister, and how like the sister is taking care of Lot's little sister, and how they were like friends going out to make money. And then you have Ver and Bartray. Like, would you really expect that if they didn't like hint it? Fer and Carol, and then Carla, who appears in FE7, and then, you know, if you played FE7 first and then FE6, you know, like, would you really expect the Bartray and Carla relationship, Raven and or should I say Raymond and Priscilla? You have Matthew and Guy. Remember that? Like,
Oh yeah.
like who? Like Matthew's like a relatively minor character, but yet he met like he like fed Guy. He ends up being the one to recruit Guy. The only hint you get, you have to be a little bit astute, in the sense that if you skip the dialogue, you really would have no idea that Matthew's the one that needs to talk to Guy. And even then they bring up the lore of like how Sacaeans like never like, I don't know, like never tell a lie, or like they always repay their favors or whatever it is. I don't know. I think Guy said like, I owe you my life, and he's like, I thought you Sacaeans like never tell a lie. You're like, oh, got him. So
And then Matthew also has a relationship with, Layla. I don't know. There's so many like hidden, unexpected relationships. Soren and FE9 and FE10. If you don't know about him, look at him. Dude, the list goes on. I always just love these. It just added so much depth to these characters that otherwise would just be random, isolated people. Suddenly they became, mini families or people connected in strange ways, and it's so good.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes the party infinitely more interesting, which is something that I think is a weak point in the newer games, where you have a lot of characters that don't really have. I mean, they're pretty much all they are is your axe character, your
right.
like
their relationship to other characters is very straightforward. It's like,
yes,
I'm your servant, I'm your retainer, whatever. I'm your butler. Like it would have been really more interesting. So like the butler in Fates, I think his name is, I don't freaking remember because my memory is terrible. I actually kind of like this character too. So, but like anyway, the main butler in Fates, it would have been really interesting like if he had some like backstory as a kid where he was like adopted by King Garen back in the day, and maybe he like at that time he like met some other person, or maybe he came from a I don't know, a really poor family, poverty family, and then maybe you meet someone that he knew as a child, a really young child later on, and he has to like talk to that character to recruit that character. My point being that this has nothing to do with his job as a butler. So it adds that second dimension to him. It's like, oh, he's not just like this butler. He's got like so much more going for him, right? Every character has their own story.
Again, I mean, it comes back to this idea that these are characters these characters are supposed to be representing real people in a real universe or whatever. Or at least you're supposed to pretend that it's a real universe.
Exactly, and real people in a real universe, when you meet them for X reason, but you know that they have their own family, they have their own life and their hobbies, probably. Like, they're not just, whatever you meet them for, right? Like, I meet my professor, I'm not just like, yeah, this guy just, teaches, the whole day. Probably he's doing something else with his life, too, and, like, it's the people say the phrase, like, it's a small world, right? I think that goes for the video games, too, right? Like, two characters meeting and being part of the army, it gives that sense of, it's a small world, with those relationships.
Right.
That's something I like. I had to talk about that one for a while because it's I really liked. Another series that does that is a Valkyrie profile, relationships between characters. But yeah. Next one is, I know we're running late here, so we'll hurry up. Characters that aren't forced to succumb to the game's constant desire to spew out dialogue, such as during battles, after level ups, in the barracks. This is definitely a preference. There's a comment saying besides Einherjar. I don't even try to say that.
Or whatever.
Yeah, besides the characters that they only say like dots. But yeah, I mean, this is just it kind of adds to that caricature, whatever. Instead of kind of imagining that, like, all right, maybe this character is saying something, or maybe they aren't, or whatever. It's always saying something. It's cool at first, but then it kind of starts to make them into I don't know, a trope. Not even. What's a good way of putting it, too?
Like, like a caricature or a. Yeah, no, I'm having a hard time myself, but
it just makes them feel like more and more generic. It's just kind of like, like we get it, like, like, Kellum, your shtick is that like no one sees you, like you don't need to like bring that up every single time you level up, every single time I meet you in the barracks, every single time you like battle, like
it's like
don't. I get it,
It's like this is another overarching theme of this list is that these are supposed to be real people, but these games insist on treating these characters like jokes. Like, Kellum is a joke. That is all he is. Like, he's a knight, whatever, but he's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
His joke is that nobody notices him. Ha ha ha, great. Like,
I mean,
I got it.
it's funny sometimes, and like for some characters it's okay, but I kind of like the not everyone has to succumb to that. So like okay, like Jafar for instance, like if you told me like Jafar is gonna be like talking after every battle, and he's gonna be saying stuff like like yeah I assassinated him, or like job complete, or like I don't know, like I just imagine him like being forced to say stuff because the game is written in such a way like yeah every character has to have a level up quote, or every character you have to be able to talk to them in the my castle and fates, so that when when they're by the farm they give you vegetables, and they have to like say some generic line about like finding these random carrots or turnips or whatever the hell it is, right? Like it's it's just I don't like the fact that the characters are forced to do that. Basically, not every character should have to succumb to that. The fact that they do just kind of it feels restrictive. And again, it goes back to what you were saying with like they feel less like real characters and more like puppets or tools of the game.
I
As a
think
result.
I think it would be less of a big deal if the characters were interesting on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and it'd be more
annoying.
tolerable. Yeah.
It's annoying, but like, if these characters were all interesting, it was like, okay, it's a cutesy little
Right.
thing
Yeah.
or
Like
whatever. Who
overlook it,
cares?
obviously. Yeah.
But in it's not. That's not the case. Like they don't have that excuse or anything
Right.
to fall back on.
It's more like all right. There's an underlying problem, and this kind of isn't helping. Right. So yeah.
Hmm.
Uniqueness in characters from limited class choices. So how do you? This is definitely another very personal preference thing. I think there's not a lot of objectivity to it, but basically in the older games, certain characters would be certain classes, and I like the way FE8 did it the most because you had two class options, and both were like almost always really good fits. But so like you had the option, but you always felt like it was a part of the character, right?
Right. And yeah, that's how. I mean, I prefer that particular way of thinking as well. I think I remember vividly when reclassing was first released.
It was
I
crazy.
thought,
Like in a way, I was excited. Like, oh man, like I can make Jagan like a swordmaster. That's pretty weird, but kind of cool.
I did not think it was cool. I never thought it was cool.
I mean,
I hate it.
it's
I
just
still
novel.
kind of hate
It's
it.
novel. So I mean, I'm always open to new ideas. But for me, like I really ever reclass because I always feel like whatever class that they are is part of their identity.
Yeah,
Like Carol is like Carol in FE7. He's a master swordsman, right? If you suddenly make him like a sage, it's just really weird.
It's like
it ruins his identity of being, the sword demon or the sword saint.
it definitely harms your immersion into the game, and especially in these new games where the characters don't have that much personality to begin with. You're already like dismantling it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It would be one thing if like I don't know if they're I don't know. I really don't know. I still don't like reclassing, but the argument is that it adds a lot like of
Options and depth.
depth and replayability, and there's definitely some truth to that. So usually I just keep my mouth shut.
Exactly.
I just don't personally do it.
Exactly. No, I feel the same way. I mean, it's optional in a sense. In a way, I feel like it's a little bit bloated because now you have so many options. It's like, all right, if I really want to think about optimization, I'd have to consider every single class option and for every single character, and it's too many options. I'm just like, screw it. Like, I don't care if this class is worst. I'm just gonna deal with it because I don't want to have to consider my 18 different reclass options for every single character. That ends up quickly adding up to like 1,000 different possibilities I have to consider. Like, I'll save myself the effort and everything. How about this next one?
Uniqueness in weapons due to limited availability. Now you can just buy more / use DLC.
Hashtag gold DLC.
Hashtag gold DLC.
DLC has really changed how gaming has worked. Like, really changed. Like, sometimes they're just glorified cheat codes, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Uniqueness in weapons due to limited availability. So basically, this means you had very limited number of weapons in games. I especially think of like sometimes they're too limited, like bolting, silence, berserk staff, uh, brave weapons. Um, obviously legendary weapons, but I mean even legendary weapons you can get those through DLC now, or at least in Awakening you could, right? So it's like, oh, you want more legendary weapons? Well, just go play the DLC. You can get as many legendary weapons as you want. You can also buy brave swords however you want and forge them. You can basically buy and forge almost anything that you would want. Um, so it definitely changes that limited availability aspect of like, oh, like I only have this one brave sword. Who the hell is gonna get it? Who's gonna use it? How much am I gonna use it? All right.
Yeah, no, that was a big thing in particularly the GBA era, that it was, you had to really like ration your weapons. I remember definitely some instances in Fire Emblem 6 where I did not have. We're talking a lot about Fire Emblem 6 today. Where instances in which I had a lot of weapons that I had been using for a while, so I did not have whole lot of uses, but I did not have a whole lot of money. So I had to be really careful, and that added another like dynamic to these games, and not just like being careful with weapons in general. In particular, I'm talking about. It felt like, I mean, they gave you they gave you badass weapons, like the legendary weapons, kind of like towards the end of the game, but not at the very end. Like, if you got that legendary weapon and just used that for the rest of the game, you would run into a problem. You couldn't do that, because you would use it up. So you still wanted to, use it when you had to.
Right.
But, it definitely, it reminds me of, like, in Doom, where you only wanted to use the big guns when you were battling the boss. I only ever wanted to use those legendary weapons when I'm like, nothing else works.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's always like use your lower end whenever you can. I mean, I still play that way.
Oh yeah, me too.
Sometimes I'm like, all right, I could kill this guy in 2 shots with an iron sword or 1 with like, a silver sword. It's like, all right, like I'll use a silver sword, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, you're right. The next one is definitely debatable. Support conversations mid-battle. That's honestly just a different way of doing support conversations. You could argue for either or. You could say that it's weird having it mid-battle because it ruins the immersion. It doesn't make sense. You could say that having it after is maybe a little bit more generic because like in Awakening they're always in a base or like they're always in camp or whatever. I'm not going to say too much about that. It's just a change. It's definitely not a better or worse change. So yeah, you don't have anything to say about that, do you?
I don't really have anything to say about that either.
Okay. More serious / curiosity piquing conversations, mostly lighthearted / funny. This just goes back to what we were saying with the change in writing, how it's not instead of like adding a lot of different connections between things and hinting towards weird backstories or weird motivations for characters. It's generally just a lot more lighthearted. The motivations are pretty clear, especially in Fates. The motivation for everyone is just that they all love Corinne, apparently.
I always felt,
or they love someone who loves Corinne. So it all just revolves around Corinne. Like if in a relationship chart in Fates, it would just be Corinne in the center with a line going to everyone else. Like that would be it.
Yeah. I feel personally, I've said this a few times. I don't think I've said this on the podcast though, that a good way of it's a good way of making these characters more interesting too. Like it's I don't know, like if you make characters talk in a certain way, like I feel like most of the dialogue in Fire Emblem is purely used to forward the plot or make jokes.
Mm-hmm.
You get what I'm saying? You don't necessarily get a lot of personality from the conversation. So what I would say I would like to see more conversations that
Just have
these
natural conversations between
natural conversations that bring these
That's
the
true.
personality the aspects of their personalities to the forefront.
And I think
In addition
in a
to
way
the
that's
list.
part of what support conversations are supposed to do. But especially for the main characters or as characters are joining, you definitely want to do that to kind of pique people's curiosity in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're totally right. Do you have anything else to say?
Nah, not on that front.
All right, fair. So we just have two more. These are kind of related, and then we're done. We've been going for a while.
Yep.
Side quests from special, sometimes tough conditions, such as beating a chapter within a certain number of turns. I really like this. And the next one is kind of related. It's multiple part chapters or chapters without a break on the world map. The reason why I say these are related is because they both come to just kind of making the flow of the campaign or the whatever you want to call it a little bit more interesting and dynamic, and also sometimes it changes up the plot a bit. So I mean, I think of a game like FE6 or FE7 especially. These games have lots of different side quests. Honestly, FE6 I still have to double check the guide just to make sure I don't want to miss all the legendary weapons after all these years, right? So, it's like, all right, beat this chapter within 25 turns. Suddenly you have a lot more motivation to, play the chapter seriously and not just turtle. You also have the kind of challenge and reward. You have, sometimes that changes the plot, like you have to keep a certain character alive. And then if that character's alive, then the dialogue changes. That's always more interesting. You have some really weird requirements in other games too. Remember the double side quest chapter in FE7?
Yeah.
He had I think the 19XX, right? They haven't had anything like that in a Fire Emblem game since then, which is just crazy. You have to get Nils to level 10 or something by chapter 7, or I don't freaking know. It was
Yeah. And then there was the chapter where you got one route, or you got one version of a chapter if your mages were at a higher level.
Yeah, they did that a lot. In FE6, it was you go to Ilia if your Ilian characters, for minor characters, mind you, if they were higher, if they had more experience, or if your Sakaean characters had more experience, then you would go to Sakae. And in FE7, you're right. It was if your lords had this much experience, then you would go one route. You would fight, I think, either Lloyd or Linus, and if it was your I don't remember if it was the mages or someone else, but if their experience is more, you go something. We're probably saying this totally wrong. It's probably something different. But the basic idea is that you have these really interesting requirements for chapter splits or different chapters. It would change the story. It adds replayability. It gives you different motivation. It makes you consider which characters are you using. Another classic one is the two different villages. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in FE6, you had you go to one village, you go one route. You go to another village, you go another route, right?
Yep.
And then I think that originated from FE1, where you get. I'm really struggling with the memory here. Samson and some other character. You basically you get one village and then you can't go to the other village as a result. And actually, supposedly, that's what inspired Fates, which I heard this in an interview or something, which is really interesting. They basically said, oh, instead of having a really small scale make this decision and you can't make that decision, they wanted to do this on an entire game scale, which is how they came up with the different routes of Fates. So that's some neat history right there. Did you know that, show?
No, I did not. I did not hear about that.
It's pretty neat stuff. Still think they could have done more with the Fates premise, but
I definitely.
And then multiple part chapters. That's FE9 and FE10 had them, I think.
Yep.
It can be a little bit annoying. I'd say still add in a checkpoint or a save point in between, because I really don't like one thing that spoilers for Fates. The final chapter did is it's like 2 parts, and you like can't save in between. So like if you die in the second part, I'm pretty sure you have to go back to the first part. And I just absolutely freaking hate that, because I hate replaying something that I've already proven I can beat. So like if I've already proven I can beat the first part, you're not helping anything by making me have to beat that again when I just beat it. So that's the only thing I don't like. Sarah made a really interesting comment. You want to?
I was about to say he made a very good point, where he's talking about kind of like from an immersion standpoint in spoilers for Awakening. When Emerin died, the game should not let him go from a romp in the Outrealms or save Anna and then immediately go back to fleeing from that battlefield.
And this is specifically when, again, spoilers, Emerin died. So they're like, in that situation, it was like Emerin died and they're like running away from the battlefield, right? And so it's exactly as you said. It's like, all right, we're running away from the battlefield. That's the context of the next map. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, you can like, go explore the world or whatever. Like go to the Outrealms and save some villagers or whatever, and then go back to we're still fleeing from the battlefield.
Yeah.
It's raining. Like that. Just makes no sense.
It's an immersion thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, wow, we banged through quite a few of these, didn't we?
Dude, we went deep with some of them too. I mean, I didn't mean to go deep with so many of them, but
no, I didn't think we would talk so much about some of these. This might be the longest podcast.
It might. I mean, I think we talked about some interesting stuff. I really hope you guys have something to say. Again, a lot of them aren't objective. They're very just kind of, these are things that change. So like, let us know like what you preferred, or if there's anything that you think is missing from the older games, or that the newer game, even things that the newer games maybe did better that the older games are missing. I know there are a lot of those.
And we don't talk about that nearly enough, I'm sure.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's lots of things that Awakening and Fates did. Like, I wish, like, the older games did them.
Definitely.
So, I mean, maybe we'll do a podcast on that after we finish the latter half of this document. There's a second half, so...
There is a second half, which we will do. Also, like, as always, feel free to let us know what you would like us to talk about in a future episode of this podcast. If you're listening, you're probably are at least familiar with our Twitter account, Fire Emblem Buzz, which if you are not a follower, please follow. If you like Fire Emblem, we will tell you everything that you need to know about.
Thank you for the shameless advertisement too.
Yeah, hey, well, you know what? We out here trying, you know what I'm saying?
Alright, so without further ado, this has been episode 2, super long. Hopefully episode 3 comes before
the mega episode
2017. Fire Emblem Mobile is coming soon, so we might, if Fire Emblem Mobile comes out before we do the next podcast, we might do a podcast to discuss that. But otherwise, look forward to the next episode of the Fire Emblem podcast.